At FEANTSA, we have always been interested in learning more about the experiences of homelessness of Roma in Europe, and we have explored this so far through our research work, by organizing training activities for our members on Roma history and discrimination. Sorry for the echo. So far, we have been looking at these situations mostly through the lenses of our work on free movement, meaning that we focused on homelessness among Roma mobile EU citizens when they experience this in their host countries while they exercise their right to free movement. And what we want to do with this series of webinars is that we want to take a step further and deepen our understanding of homelessness among Roma in their countries of origin as well. So we think that given the high risk of homelessness for Roma and the precarious status of their housing across Europe, this is a highly relevant subject, and I do believe it's confirmed by a number of initiatives that focus on housing in the past year at the European level, but also national level. And also, we've had about 140 registrations for the webinar today. I think this is also a sign of interest from the part of the homelessness sector and other partners. So thank you for that. Following the series of webinars, we will also put together a concept note, which we will use in our future work, and we will collect here all the experiences and the conversations from today and from the other two webinars that will happen next week. A very quick technical note at this point. As I said, we are in a closed format for the meeting, so we're able to see everyone and to hear you. So please make sure you're muted unless we are in the Q&A section, which will come at the end of the meeting. And also, we are curious to hear who is with us in the room. Take a moment to write in the chat where you are joining from, what is your organization, and if you have questions, also feel free to write them in the chat. We will try to address everything in the Q&A section. Also, to let you know that it will be possible to take the floor after the presentations. And if you want to do so later on, please raise your hand and we will allow you to speak. And finally, this event is recorded. If you do not want to show up on camera, you can still stay with us, but have your camera off. You don't need to appear on the recording. So with this being said, and without further delay, I am just going to pass on the floor to our speakers. We have three excellent speakers today with us. Thank you so much for joining. They will help us set the scene in the first webinar and help us understand better the history of Roma in connection to housing, and also what is the current situation of today. And we will start with Marina Csikós. I hope I'm pronouncing it well. She will talk to us more about Roma history and discrimination against Roma in Europe. Marina is a project assistant at FEANTSA International Network. She is a feminist and gender equality professional who works at the intersection of activism, art, and policy. And she also co-founded the feminist collective of Romani gender experts. Following Marina's presentation, we will be hearing from Bernard Rorke. He is representing the European Roma Rights Centre, and he will give us the historical overview on how housing rights have been denied for Roma in Europe. He has been active on Roma issues for over 15 years and currently works as an advocacy officer for the ERGO. And to close the series of presentation, we will have Florin Botonogu joining us from Romania. Florin is the president of the Policy Center for Roma and Minorities Foundation, who is also a member of the ERGO network based in Brussels. And he will tell us more about the results from the very recent ERGO survey where the focus was on housing and what is the situation of Roma across Europe. Florin has been working in different capacities for local authorities or organizations such as the OSCE, the World Bank, and the Council of Europe, and his areas of expertise are housing, social inclusion, poverty, and vulnerable groups. Thank you so much to all of you for being willing to contribute today. And I will now share Marina's presentation and invite you to take the floor. Thank you, Marina.
Thank you so much, Simona. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marina Csikós. Thank you so much, Simona, also for the introduction. Just maybe a little bit more about myself. I grew up in Hungary. I am a Hungarian Roma woman, and I was living there for almost 30 years. Then after my studies, which was on gender studies, I moved to Brussels, firstly worked with the EN Norwegians, where actually housing was also a very specific issue that we have been working on. And then I joined FEANTSA International Network, which is an international Roma youth organization, and we do a lot of advocacy, being based in Brussels, but also research, human rights education, mostly for marginalized young Roma people. I also had the chance to work with FEANTSA last year, where I developed an educational tool for its member organizations on basically the history of the Roma and different issues such as intersectional discrimination, which I think is also very relevant for housing and homelessness and migration in general. So I'm very happy to be here once again. And in this very short presentation, I will be talking about historical overview of the Roma in Europe, but you will see that in this presentation, there is a lot of things that are missing. Is because of the time limit, of course, but I'm happy that we will have more presentations after it, and maybe you can explore more on this topic. So my first slide is about, just a little bit learn about who the Roma are. So you hear this term, which is basically an umbrella term to define, and Roma actually refers to Roma, Sinti, Kale, and other related groups in Europe, including travelers, of course, and the Eastern groups, such as Dom and Dom, and also covers the wide diversity of the groups concerned, including persons who identify themselves as gypsies. Maybe you have, maybe in the past, before started to work with Roma people, most of the people in general know Roma people as gypsies, which I would like to state in the beginning that it's mostly is a derogatory, pejorative word that has been used for centuries for the Roma people. As I said, there is a group which call themselves, identify as gypsies, but I think it's always better to ask the person themselves or the community themselves how they would like to be called, because there are a lot of misunderstanding and also like conflicts that can be generated from this. So just a little bit about what the gypsy word means. So it came from basically the misunderstanding or the misconception of the people centuries ago, that Roma people came from Egypt, and this is how they got this Egyptian gypsies word. And this is absolutely false, because in our Romani language, this word gypsies actually doesn't even exist. But throughout the history and throughout the centuries, it has been developed like some pejorative and negative connotations. So yeah, thanks to the Roma rights movements and different activists as well as scholars, by now we have this political and also like social understanding that people shouldn't use this word unless it's defining a specific group of the Roma people, which is an umbrella term, as I said. So the European Commission currently uses the following definition, just to have another definition of what or who the Roma are. So the reference to Roma is an umbrella term, as I said once again, encompasses a wide range of different people of Romani origins, such as Roma, Sinti, Kala, Romanicez, and Boyash Rudari, as I said. It also encompasses groups such as Ashkali, Egyptians, Yenish, Dom, Lom, Rom, and Abdal as well. as traveler populations, including ethnic travelers, or those designated under the administrative term gens de voyage, such as in Belgium, and people who identify as gypsies, Tziganes, or Tziganes without denying their specificities. So you can see even these two different terms that Roma basically is an umbrella term, which includes many other subgroups. However, it is really very diverse from country to country or context to context, how we call each other for ourselves. So on the next slide, please, you can just see basically the migration of the Roma. Yes, so the Roma people Indian origins is uncontested, actually, by analyzing Romani, the language of the Roma, and comparing it with other languages. It could be shown. Excuse me, can you please everyone mute themselves because I can still hear it. Okay. So it could be shown that the Roma migrated from the central India to the eastern parts of northern India and then probably stayed there for some time. Then they possibly moved to Persia and Armenia through the Byzantine Empire to Asia Minor and then later to Greece. Also, linguistic findings point that a fairly homogeneous group which arrived in the Byzantine Empire because of all of groups of Roma existing today have a common linguistic basic, which also includes parts of lexicon and grammar taken from the Greek. And also, according to more recent preliminary findings on population genetics, this is very famous today. A lot of people are trying to trace back their genetics, that the Roma ancestors were actually Indian. So on this map also you can see the different migrations through basically to the northern part of Africa as well, but mostly to Europe and to the Western Europe as well. And there you can also see on the picture some of the subgroups that have arrived to Europe. Next slide, please. So I think we cannot talk about the history of the Roma without the marginalization that they have been facing over the centuries. So here on this slide, there are just a few historical happenings and historical facts that I wanted to share with you. And of course, there are more. It's just some of those which I think were really crucial when talking about the history of the Roma. So we also have to mention that actually a few days ago I was at a European Parliament conference, and they have been talking about the abolishment of the slavery, the African slavery, and there has been not really mentioning about that we don't have to go to the United States or even to the west, to west of Europe to talk about slavery and have instances of such unhuman actions. But actually there was also more than 500 years of slavery in Romania as well, which was only abolished in the mid-19th century. So I think it's really crucial to talk about. And also, when it comes to Spain, it is not really discussed that in Spain more than 10,000 Roma were rounded up in well-planned military police action one day in the 1749. The purpose, according to leading to clergymen who advised the government, was to root out this bad race, which is hateful to God and pernicious to man. So you can also see that how religion back then in the 18th century was really influential when it comes to the persecution of the Roma. So the result was basically devastating: deportations, detentions, forced labor, and killings destroyed much original Roma culture in Spain. We also have to talk about the Roma genocide, the Porajmos, of course, which is still not really recognized in the history or in the society in general. So beside the Jews and of course other marginalized communities such as LGBTI and also people who were fighting for democracy and people with disabilities, beside them, Roma were also persecuted and also murdered during the Second World War. So that's also something which we have to talk about when it comes to the marginalization of the Roma. And another thing that I would like to mention is the forced sterilization of Roma women and girls, which were happening in Norway, in Slovakia, Hungary, and also Czechia as well. These are just some of the countries which have been already researched, and also we have evidence from. However, it's known that there were more countries, unfortunately, which have contributed to the forced sterilization of Roma women. So these are just some of the instances of how Roma were marginalized and persecuted during the centuries. In the educational tool that I developed with FEANTSA includes more, so I invite you to have a look at those, and actually also the history of the Roman culture and everything is much more explained well. But now, because of the limited time, I would like to go to the next slide, which is basically about the result of the persecution and the historical marginalization that Roma had to face with. So you can see that when it comes to the situation of the Roma today, and specifically education, we can really see that what led to this marginalization and this systemic and everyday oppression. So when it comes to education, we can see that I'm sure that also in your practice, in your everyday work, you face with these issues that, for instance, Roma children fall behind their non-Roma peers in all educational indicators. Here I'm referring to the Fundamental Rights Agency's surveys and reports, and here are some of the numbers as well on the right side. When it comes to compulsory primary education, we can see that only about half, 53% of Roma children between the age of 4 and the starting age of compulsory education participate in early childhood education. On average, only 18% of Roma between 6 and 24 years of age attend educational level lower than that corresponding to their age. We also have to speak about the segregation of the Roma children. This is happening in many countries, mostly in Eastern Europe, but it's also happening, of course, in the West as well. So that's another issue, that Roma children and the young people have to face with. And this is basically, as I said, it's the historical oppression and the result of the historical oppression and the marginalization that has led to this. Next slide, please. So when it comes to employment, which is, of course, is also in very close relation to becoming homeless or migrating to abroad, we also can see that when it comes to the employment data, or like basically looking at how Roma do when it comes to employment in different countries, it's not really promising as well either. So on average, we can see that 23% of Roma aged between 20 and 64 in countries surveyed were in paid work. In 2021, here I also refer to the Fundamental Rights Agency Roma survey, which is very, very low. So you can see that basically more than half of the Roma population is not in paid work. So that's still a huge number, which of course can lead to homelessness or other difficulties with finances. We can also see that when it comes to the gender dimension, that only 28% of Roma women aged between 20 and 60 age are in employment in comparison with 58% of Roma men. This goal is similar to that observed in 2016. So it also shows that Roma women and girls are less likely get employed, unfortunately. And the pay gap is also even bigger than their non-Roma women peers as well. Coming to the last slide, I would like to just briefly talk about the harassment and the hate crimes against Roma, because of course there are so many other things which are missing from this presentation, but housing will be something which will be talked about later on. So many people don't really know, like, okay, what we call hate crimes or hate speech. So I would like to just a little bit talk about it, so we have an understanding of why is it so important to talk about.
Sorry,
so,
Marina, just to let you know that if you can do it in 2 minutes, I know this is very important, but yeah.
This slide, yes. So hate crimes and hate speech are growing problems across Europe, across the European countries. Hate crime and hate speech are ambitious, but not strictly legal terms or concepts. Hate speech covers many forms of expressions which spread, incite, promote, or justify hatred, violence, and discrimination against person or group or persons for a variety of the reasons. So this killing me. So while hate crime, also known as hate crime or bias-motivated crime, is a criminal act motivated by bias or prejudice toward particular groups of people. So here are just some of the data, again, from the Fundamental Rights Agency that is showing us that Roma people and Roma communities are facing a really high harassment and hate crimes in Europe, just to mention a few. So about 70% of the respondents say that they were physically attacked because of their being Roma or travelers in the 12 months before the survey. So that's a really high number, but I think even after finishing the survey, it just has grown. And almost half of the Roma and traveler respondents, which is like 44%, say that they experienced hate-motivated harassment in the 12 months before the survey. So we can see that it's not enough that Roma people have to face with challenges in employment and education as well, and of course political representation, housing issues, etc. But harassment and hate crimes are also something which are part of their lives on the daily basis and systematically as well. So I would like to thank you so much for your time and listening to this very, very brief presentation. As I said, I would really encourage you to look at the educational tool and of course other materials as well, developed by Roma scholars, developed by Roma women, Roma LGBTI people, who, if you really look at something more gender specific, or you are interested in their experiences when it comes to discrimination and historical injustice. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marina. I would like to go straight to Bernard now because we are running behind on time. Bernard, please.
Thank you. So I'll jump straight in. Just 2 weeks ago, before the winter moratorium on evictions, on the 2nd of November, a single mother and her 2 teenage children were evicted from a rental apartment owned by the municipality in the 19th district of Budapest. Now, activists who had attempted to negotiate with the deputy mayor on the Romani family's behalf accused the self-proclaimed left-wing municipality of pushing out tenants in order to demolish the house and sell off the block, refusing to extend rental contracts, and with court approval, putting arbitrary tenants out on the street without providing them with alternative accommodation. Now, this was a family that had no debts. They had never been in arrears with rent or utility bills. And the municipality never referred to death in connection with the family's eviction. But the municipality didn't extend the family's fixed-term rental contract, cited an unspecific violation of the rules of community coexistence, and then initiated fast-track eviction proceedings against them as arbitrary tenants. Now, according to the family, the municipality's only offer of assistance came from their family care assistant, who offered the option of taking the 14-year-old child into care if the family could not provide adequate housing after the eviction, and placing the 18-year-old and their mother into a homeless shelter. Now, the evicted mother of 2 children works as a kitchen helper, and her earnings fall far short of what would be needed to pay rent in the private sector. Also, as a Romani family, they'd inevitably encounter discrimination in the rental market. Now, as a housing activist group put it, the municipality not only deprived the family of the rented apartment they themselves had renovated, but also of the hope that they would have independent housing again in the foreseeable future. Now, this is just one from a host of similar stories right across Europe's worst off, multiply disadvantaged regions. Entire communities of Roma subsist in deep poverty. Many are forced to live in close proximity to landfills or toxic sites. They're often spatially segregated from the rest of society, living in so-called settlements, slum neighborhoods, or improvised camps, and routinely denied equal access to clean water and sanitation, often cut off from affordable heating and electricity supplies. Now, the evidence gathered in a report I prepared earlier this year for civil rights defenders leaves little doubt about the extent of environmental racism faced by Roma across Europe, and that this is a deliberate and structural form of racism. Now, I've actually been involved in Roma issues for 25 years, and for those 25 years, many thousands of Roma have been forcibly displaced for reasons ranging from armed conflict or evicted to make way for gentrification, tourism, or corporate development projects. Mass demolitions and evictions frequently banish Roma communities to sites beyond the pale, out of sight and out of mind, to desolate locations, devoid of infrastructure or public transport or services. Now, this hasn't gone unnoticed. The September 2023 EU Council conclusions call for action to ensure equal access for Roma to decent housing. The conclusion said that the acute lack of housing provision, policy measures or investment, combined with discrimination and segregation, have caused the gap in access to housing between Roma and the rest of the population to remain virtually unchanged over the recent years. The conclusion stated that the segregation of Roma communities is exacerbated often by gentrification, which pushes low-income families to leave areas where property values increase significantly. And such obstacles reinforce a vicious cycle of intergenerational poverty and violation of human rights. This limits life expectancy and impedes social cohesion. Now, the Council stressed how important it was for member states to redress these inequalities and ensure access to adequate housing. However, recent developments that we've come across suggest that many member states will be slow to heed this latest set of conclusions. Now, in France, while the toxic rhetoric around evictions is less often heard than the days of President Sarkozy, Prime Minister Manuel Valls, evictions nonetheless continue. Just this October, the Lille Human Rights League warned that evictions of Roma in the north are on the rise, and the proposals for rehousing are simply not realistic. Families are offered 3 nights in a hotel or accommodation in hostels for mothers and their children, but no room for fathers. Now, often families get caught up in a cycle of repeat evictions, and this means employment opportunities are scuppered, schooling for children disrupted. Now, with the increase in expulsions, things are becoming harsher. It's no longer the case that residents of evicted camps can come by later to collect their possessions. What happens now is destruction of property has become a systemic practice. There's no furniture storage provided, so the prefecture calls companies who come and simply raze and destroy everything. In September 2023, the ERC and others launched a new collective complaint to the European Committee of Social Rights against France, asserting that expedited procedures for the imposition of fixed fines on travellers in France for illegal halting in order to set up a home, even temporarily, is blatantly discriminatory, further criminalizes travellers, constitutes a violation of their fundamental human rights, and amounts to a deliberate assault on the nomadic way of life. If you move to the Czech Republic, just recently, the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe, Dunja Mijatovic, expressed her deep concern about the lack of tangible progress on the advancement of rights of Roma, and noted that no specific housing programs exist to support Roma who face discrimination in the private rental market. Her report spoke of systemic discrimination by local authorities who, when purporting to combat undesirable social phenomena and early attempts to prevent Roma from accessing specific types of housing benefit by establishing benefit-free zones, although this was subjected to a successful legal challenge, the result of deliberate discrimination and neglect is that many Roma, she said, continue to live in unsuitable housing, which can lead to situations that seriously infringe upon their private and family lives, as well as their right to health, and in some cases, their right to life is put at risk. In Italy, a recent arson attack in the Italian city of Prato in Tuscany in September. Somebody threw a Molotov cocktail at the camps and setting part of it on fire. Fortunately, only a work truck was incinerated because a local MP had said if some caravan had caught fire, it would have been the end. Now on Facebook, the local far-right Fratelli d'Italia MP, Giovanni Donzelli, who had wanted to raise the camp to the ground, chanting, "Look for a job, a house, the fun is over." He escaped censure for incitement to racial hatred thanks to parliamentary immunity. But this kind of hate speech and hounding Roma from camps has gone hand in hand for far too long and attracted much criticism of Italy from international human rights bodies. In January 2019, the ECSR noted that despite 2 decades of recommendations with regard to nomad camps and forced evictions, many Roma continue to live in deplorable conditions in spite of court rulings confirming that assigning housing in prefabricated containers surrounded by fencing constitutes discrimination. Now, for its part, the European Commission found that these appalling conditions did not constitute a breach of the Racial Equality Directive. ERC research found that families living in informal camps in Italy were persistently evicted without respect for the protections prescribed by international standards. Residents were not consulted prior to eviction. They didn't get formal eviction orders, and that made it difficult to challenge the evictions legally. The report found the situation of school children, elderly people, pregnant women, and people with health issues was not taken into consideration. Most of the time, the evictees were not offered alternative accommodation, which forced them into an endless cycle of evictions from one camp to another. Now, the focus on housing in these recent European Council conclusions is very welcome, and the recommendations are worthy. On the issue of what constitutes segregation, the Council's definitional clarity is noteworthy, and I'll just quote them. Segregated settlements are slums and substandard housing settlements of an informal and stable nature with physical, functional, and/or social isolation, where the objective conditions related to housing, poverty, and access to rights and public services are significantly worse as compared to the rest of the population. Now, this segregation is symptomatic of a wider issue of environmental racism faced by Roma across Europe, starkly evident in forced displacement and mass evictions. It's clear it's a deliberate and structural form of exclusion that banishes communities and excludes them. And it's clear that much remains to be done when it comes to environmental justice to ensure that Roma and other racialized minorities are not sidelined in Europe's colorblind Green Deals for a climate resilient and prosperous society that leaves no one behind. Now, these council conclusions signal an overdue but welcome recognition of the need to remedy these injustices. The pity is that the worst offenders among the member states will likely pay little heed. So thus the struggle continues, for justice is never done and it must be exacted. Now, by the Commission's own reckoning, the first EU framework on Roma inclusion was an inexcusable failure. And the European, among the policy priority areas of education, health, employment and housing, it is housing where the failures of member states are worst. The FRA data in 2018 show that a high share of Roma have no regular access to basic sanitation, live in overcrowded conditions. The share of Roma experiencing discrimination in housing has actually increased in a number of countries. A third of the Roma surveyed continue to live in housing that has no tap water inside the house. 38% don't have a toilet, shower, or bathroom inside the home. And in Romania, the country with the highest number of Roma in the EU, Roma enjoy access to safe water in rates similar to those in Bhutan, Ghana, or Nepal. Now, the issue of forced evictions, Neil Muznieks, former Council of Europe Commissioner, described Roma evictions as Europe's silent scandal. And he dismissed the wrong-headed notion that there's something inevitable about poverty among Roma and described the appalling housing conditions as the most visible result of discrimination and social exclusion. In the same year, the operational platform for Roma equality, which included FRA, the OSCE, Equinet, the Council of Europe, and the UN, called for sustainable solutions and an end to further evictions of Roma and travellers. The joint statement drew attention to the emotional trauma wrought by the constant threat of evictions and to the disproportionately negative effect such evictions have on Romanian traveller children. Now, in its communication, sorry,
Bernard, you have 2 minutes left.
2 minutes. I'm fine, just about to finish. We would, just last week, we had the EU Roma platform for Roma inclusion hosted by the Spanish presidency. Now, the Commission stressed that funding resources were available to make a difference. There's no shortage of research, data, and knowledge about the extent of the crisis and what needs to be done. The Council recommendations were also unambiguous about what needs to be done. So I'll just finish by echoing a remark I made in Madrid, and apologies to anybody that was there. I said, as long as the greed of speculators and property developers takes precedence over the fundamental human rights of women, children, and men of no property, this issue will not be resolved. We need massive investment in affordable public housing for all who need it. And we need non-discriminatory access to public services for Roma and other racialized minorities across this prosperous continent. And in the interim, we need an immediate moratorium on forced evictions of Roma. Sad to say, such words fall again on stony ground. Efforts we've made to make headway with reasoned debate and evidence-based advocacy in pursuit of justice have fallen on hard times. And that's why the ERC, we believe strategic litigation matters in the struggle against such injustice, its powerful perpetrators and the systems that reproduce it. And strategic litigation is just one aspect of the resistance to this relentless and pitiless confluence of neoliberal avarice and racial prejudice. This resistance is comprised of coalitions of local and international Roma and pro-Roma civil society organizations, civil rights, anti-racist and housing activist groups, environmentalist groups, and directly affected communities who have waged and continue to wage long-running campaigns, protests, and advocacy actions against powerful vested interests. And I'll just finish on that note.
Thank you, Bernard. I'm sorry to interrupt you. But yeah, it is the time to go to Florin, but thank you for ending on with such a powerful message. Florin, please, if you want to share your screen.
Yes. Now I'm sharing my screen. Good, you see it?
Yes.
So it's very difficult to continue after Bernard because, you know, I although I know and we know these figures and this kind of situation, every time you hear, it saddens you. So thinking that I cannot add more to this sadness, I have to to do something else. So I'll just go briefly through this one, and I will not. But actually, we have to mention because this is one of the latest reports referring to the situation of Roma housing in Europe, and it's a very good report because it combines the data that we have until now and various data from credible sources, international sources and national sources, with the flavor of people working in the field and coming with concrete cases and scenarios why these conclusions and legislation and everything we have in place doesn't really work, in the sense that it doesn't really improve the situation in the field. So here is a little bit about ERGO. It's a network of 30 national members aiming to address the situation of Roma in the field. I will not say anything about Roma because Marina did the introduction, but I would look at the key figures. I don't have figures in my presentation, but if you look, and I advise you to check the report, it's on the website, on ERGO website. It's actually poverty porn. When you look at 80% at risk of poverty and 41 reporting experiencing anti-Gypsyism and only 43 paid in employment, And these are some of the figures. You can find like even worse in the report. Okay, just let me say that the report covers more countries, at least 6 countries in EU and the others, like Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, and Spain, and also have inputs from Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Ireland, Kosovo, North Macedonia, and Turkey. Okay, so I'm just gonna go very quickly through the key messages because you can read the other messages on the screen. We need urgent and significant investment to improve the structural condition of the dwellings that most Roma inhabit. And again, I stressed this also in Madrid at the platform. We need to make clear that the role of the state in housing is to provide housing actually for the poor, not for the middle class. Okay. Then the other key message. We need comprehensive desegregation plans with clear targets, including the legislation of irregular housing situations and tackling the environmental impact of unsuitable locations. Let me say that I've been involved in the last 2 years in the irregular housing situation because we have a legislation trying to apply it, trying to, and it's not that easy. The fact that you have a legislation is it's a huge step forward, but it's not enough. When you take this legislation to the local level, you can find that you need another like 10 pieces of legislation modified so that the local authorities can work. And this is only the legislative point of view. If you think about, for example, relocation, because these irregular settlements, many of them need to be relocated, then it's even worse. That's why I would stress that we need a stronger involvement of the state and of the local authorities, of course supported by the EU, but that's another discussion and probably we can have this discussion later. Another message: Roma housing and energy poverty must be addressed through better access to income and better regulation of the housing and utilities market, while associated bureaucracy should be simplified. And here we have housing that is simply unaffordable for most of the Roma. Actually, one thing that I did not mention here at this side is very important, that according to the ethos definition in Europe, most of the Roma can be considered homeless. If you look at the definition and if you look at the Roma living condition, we have most of the Roma living in homelessness. Okay, we were here. Let's go a bit farther. Anti-bias training must be compulsory for all housing actors, including local actors, alongside strong anti-discrimination legislation. It's very important here to say that people, actors, stakeholders simply do not understand this issue, or they pretend very well not to understand it, or they simply don't understand it. When you talk about segregation, irregular settlement, informal settlement, I mean, you go to the man and he will say, but they are there for 60 years. They can exist for 60 years more, so no problem. It's not my problem. Eviction should be indeed the last resort and must entail due notice and the provision of decent alternative housing. The social housing stock needs to be expanded and improved, while its allocation should follow a rights-based housing-first approach reducing conditionality and unaffordability, and ensuring that vulnerable groups such as the Roma are prioritized. Just one mention here that in Romania, I mean, the housing first approach is great, and it has been proved to work. Unfortunately, in Romania at least, it is not applied. Actually, the framework in Romania is the opposite, meaning we cannot and we will not give housing to the poor because they do not have the rest of the conditions. They do not have money, they do not have jobs, they do not have education, they do not have everything. So when they have all this, I will give them houses. Maybe when they have all this, they don't need your house. That's a problem because they can afford it. The next one. Policy makers and all housing actors must cooperate with Roma stakeholders and their civil society representatives to ensure evidence-based solutions, support disaggregated data collection, foster common understanding, and bridge cultural gaps. Yeah, that's it's about the stakeholders, the ones who are making policies related to housing. Rarely, I do not say they do not approach Roma actors, they do, but rarely, and their input is not necessarily taken into account while making this, and I'm gonna talk a little bit more about this later. Okay. All 6 national Roma framework include housing as an objective, but in some, targets are vague, concrete measures are lacking, and there are doubts about the political will needed for the actual change. That's a problem because we used to criticize other policies. We don't have right policies, yeah. But when you look at Roma-related policies, and when you see that even in the strategy you don't have very clear targets and plans, then you have a big problem. Okay, that is our website where you can find the study. And in 5 minutes, I'd like to talk in parallel about 2 issues. I mean, in housing, it's about a human rights approach that Bernard emphasized very well, but we also have a development-based approach. Because after all, when you talk about this, you need housing. That's the end of the story, and that's a message that we don't hear too much. We really need housing, because we talk a little too much about the housing market that does not provide for the poor and so on and so on. No, we need proper housing and we need more state involvement. So when it comes to human rights approach at the central level, we have the legislation. We have some legislation. For example, in Romania, the housing legislation dates back to 1996 and has been modified many times. We have a very recent housing strategy at the national level, yeah, but we don't have important elements like, for example, segregation or evictions are still unclear. Where it should be more clear, and where it is most clear at the national level, this human rights based approach is at the level of EU funds. The EU funds, because somebody says, yes, we have money. Yes, we have money from the EU. Don't have so much money from the state, but we have from the EU. Yeah, and the money from the EU come with several conditions. One of these conditions is strictly related to segregation. You are not allowed to be segregated. Of course, we know that this happened, at least in 2007-2014 financing period. But the truth is that you have provisions in there. What is happening is that although you have these provisions, we don't have so many reports about how these provisions were implemented or not. And that's again the problem, because we don't know how much EU money was spent for creating segregation, at least in the last period. And it's a long discussion here, who should do it and how, and probably we should have it later. And if we come down,
Florin,
yeah, 2 minutes, I know.
I will have
If
to
we
see,
come,
yeah.
yeah, if we come down to the local level, here, can I say that in terms of housing, of course, there is a total lack of understanding of human rights, at least related to Roma communities. And may I say that funding can be a strong incentive for the local authorities to act, actually. Of course, it's not so easy to access this money, and you need some expertise. But we can use here some resources and actually do the stuff in the field. Thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Florin. If you could stop sharing the screen as well.
Now I'm doing this.
Thank you. So we are late. I would like to ask for everyone's patience to have some 10 extra minutes. And I would also like to invite Virgil Bițu to make a contribution. As Florin was mentioning, everything is quite sad, but we are going to look at positive things as well. And Virgil will tell us a bit about his experience. He's a Roma activist from Romania, working currently in the UK and planning to develop a new project to support people experiencing homelessness who are Roma. So please, Virgil, if you can share with us your expertise and your plans for the future.
Thank you very much. As Simona told you, my name is Virgil. I'm the chair of ROTA, which is the acronym for Roma Organization for Training and Advocacy. And I'm also working to another rough sleeping organization here in London, together with my colleagues who are here, Florin, Mania, and Sorina, who are working to another organization. And we are working with about 400 Roma rough sleepers only in 2 boroughs of central London. You know, when I joined this rough sleeping organization, I thought to myself that I may try to change the system and make it more effective, and the resources to get to the beneficiaries as much as possible, and to be more efficient. But yeah, so we are still fighting the system because we have no direct access to the resources, and we have no access to decision making. I can tell you the last week experience in UK. It's a severe weather emergency protocol when it's launched by the local authorities, when the temperature goes below 0 degrees. And because we were not part of decision making, it was decided that the Roma rough sleepers, only the Roma rough sleepers, have to be accommodated in churches and cult venues. Because behind the decision, behind the reasoning behind the decision is that Roma are very compact communities, and they usually sleep together because of safety reasons. You know, they are mocked, they are abused by trespassers. Even, I'm sorry to say, it happened. Even they peed on our brothers and sisters. And because they are sleeping together, they should be accommodated together. But you know, couples, they don't want to sleep together in the same area, in confined area. And it happened that most of our people are still sleeping on the street with the temperature below 0 degrees. You know, if we raise this issue, and I'm very aware what I'm doing now, Yeah, because as I told you, I'm an employee of one organization, and I know that some people here in the meeting are from decision-making level. We cannot say nothing because we lose our jobs. I can tell you that even in last weekend, I've been on the street to drink a coffee with the Roma rough sleepers, trying to comfort them, because I don't want to comfort the decision-making bodies for their decisions. And this is the third year when I'm assisting at SWEP, and this is the third year when it fails. The Roma rough sleepers are left on the street. So this is about the system and about our access to change the system, and it's in general. So it's not only in homelessness, it's not only in rough sleepiness, it's in general. It's our access to decision making and our access to the resources is very limited, and usually we are part of the same system that doesn't make any difference if we are called Roma representative or Roma-led organization or Roma grassroots organizations, because in order to get our salaries, we have to comply with the decisions and to be satisfied with the resources we are given. But Rota will try to make more to change the system. Even we will be left without our daily jobs. We'll try to take a position because first of all we are Roma rights activists, and it's our mission to serve the people we claim to represent, and also we are trying now to create a network here in UK which is really grassroots based, and to improve the local representation and democratic participation of Roma communities. I'm sorry I cannot give you details, dates about my activities with rough sleepers, but I can tell you about my professional experience that we struggle very much with the Roma here, accessing the services here in UK and also accessing the services in Romania. For example, there are some opportunities in Romania, but our clients cannot access the services. For example, professional training qualification or those kind of startup programs, because they don't qualify the criteria imposed by those programs. Many people would prefer to stay in Romania and earn a bit less money than to come here to freeze on the street. And even for them, it's not so proud activity to beg on London streets. So it's degrading even for them. But instead of this is their resource, of income resource. For example, it's a family in Iași. They live about 20 person in 3 spaces, 3 rooms. It's a bedroom, living room, and kitchen. One teenager is sleeping under the table in the living room. And one of the members told me that we have almost similar conditions with the London streets, but at least there we earn more than we can ever earn here. So, but they would go to work, believe me, and even here, but they don't qualify to get jobs here in UK because of the government in UK. They take more and more to the immigrants. They take from their rights, from the immigrants' rights. So I say that the most important thing is that we should concentrate on a grassroots organization that should act like local mediators between the services and the communities in general, not only in homelessness and grassrootsness. And it's an appeal also to the authorities. Take us on board. It's the time to take us on board, and to take us on board to the decision-making process, not only to use us like the Roma tick on the list, and you've done your job as a consultation, so if you want to resolve the gypsy problem, which is not the gypsies problem, it's the society problem, because the gypsy problem wasn't created by the gypsies. It had been presented by earlier by Marina and Bernard. Yeah, so it's a 1,000-year problem created by the general society. So if you want to resolve the gypsy problem, you have to do it with us, not just using us time to time as you want to wish and to take the Roma political correctness. And we have been consulted. Thank you very much. We have been invited to meetings. Thank you very much. We have a great meal. But the clients on the street still struggle, and they are dying. This year we had 2 deaths on the street in London, which is very, and now a lot of people with chronic diseases left to sleep under 0 degrees. Yeah, because we have the tick on the list. I am working in a Roma organization. My colleagues are there. They're Roma as well, and the system is going. Yeah, thank you very much, and sorry for my personal intervention. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very interesting to hear always from you, and thank you for underlining these important issues such as Roma representation in decision-making and empowering grassroots level. We couldn't agree more. I see there is a hand up from Bianca. Would you like to share something or react, Bianca?
Shocked, Virgil, to hear that there were 2 deaths, and I'm just very curious what the society reaction was and how you are addressing this, thinking of human rights, for example. I can only mention that in Oslo it's even worse. They open the accommodation only when it's -10, so it's actually a lot worse than only 0. But I'm curious about the reaction. What happened? I mean, it's unacceptable.
No, so here the rough sleeping services are very well, with the policy making and the safeguarding and all this kind of stuff. It was about diseases that couldn't be, prevented. That couldn't be prevented or foreseen. Yeah, so in terms of policy making, of policies and safeguarding, our services are very well, at a high level. Yeah, so in case of chronic diseases, they are well kept. My colleague Mania, she is the one who is dealing with the most vulnerable cases with chronic diseases, and they are given accommodation, but only there are a few cases. The 2 cases of that, it was they couldn't be prevented, that couldn't be foreseen. Yeah.
Thank you. As we are late, I would just like to turn to our 3 speakers from earlier and see if they have any questions or any last points to make at this moment. If not, we have a hand raised from Sorina. Please, Sorina.
Hi, my name is Florin Botonogu. I'm with my colleagues Sarina in the room, and I'm using the same devices. I just want to add one more thing on those presentations are brilliant. I just want to add the integrated measures, the words, into the discussions, because, yeah, I'm working as well in London, and what it's missing is the solutions for those people who can take the status to live and to work and to bring their families in here. And because they can take the status of being in here, they don't have another solution but to go back home. Unfortunately, when they go back home in Romania, most of the times, most of them, there's nothing there for them. So if we want to improve the life of Roma people, we have to bring together the local authorities from Romania and the local authorities from London as well to stay on the same table with the integrated approaches. When we talk about houses, probably with some help from local authorities from London, who doesn't want them here because they don't have a plan of auction in the progress or move on plan, then if they're going to send it back home, they will always find a way to come back in London and stay on the street, because back home they will not going to have anything. And instead of being home when they will be with their families, extended families, with children, everyone, they will find illegal ways to come back in London or Paris or you name it. So if we definitely want to change it, is okay, they're not qualified for being illegal in your country, have the local authorities from their own native country to bring them to the next level, you know, with accommodation, employment, and everything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Florin. This is also something that we stand for, and we ask for more coordination, of course, between host countries and origin countries. And like it was also echoed in the presentations from earlier, more responsibility should be taken by authorities. Marina, please.
Yeah, just as a final note, I would like to thank you so much for the Roma activists who are on the field and trying to help the people. Yeah, what we can see is that, you know, most of the solutions that we are bringing up, or the solutions that are trying to bring to our people, is, yeah, decided on a higher level. And I think our role as Roma activists and people who are connected to the field, and also like scholars, you know, our job is basically to try to enter these rooms where decisions are taken. And I just want to encourage you to not give up, and, you know, to knock on the door and they don't open it, because that's the only way to bring bigger changes to the people.
Thank you. I think that is a great final message, and I can also express from our side that we will always support Roma activists. We're thankful for having you here and sharing with us all your experiences. Like Florin mentioned earlier, it is not a positive picture, but we need to continue working on this. So in the next week, in the coming week, we will have 2 more webinars where we will focus in on country cases and projects that have succeeded in supporting people to exit homelessness, or even to do harm reduction, to alleviate the pain and the suffering that they experience on the street. And we want to understand how to improve this work in the homelessness sector and in the other connecting sectors. So if you didn't register already, please register for the next 2 webinars. And for any questions, feel free to reach out to us by email before then. Thank you all for your speeches, for your interventions, your time, and for your patience with the delay and the technicalities. So yeah, I'm wishing you a very happy day and hope to see you next week online. Thank you.